Story 1. Went to a movie, first date with plans for dinner afterward. As soon as the lights went down, his hands were all over my breasts, thighs, and moving toward my crotch. When I leaned in to tell him to stop, he tried to make out with me. We had just met 15 minutes ago. We had not shared a first kiss, and he was trying to put his tongue down my throat. There was no dinner. Story 2. She brought her friend for security and expected me to pay for both of them. I waited while they placed their expensive orders. Then, I said I needed more time to look at the menu and pretended to head to the bathroom before leaving. Story 3. I drove up to her apartment, and she was standing in front with her mother and siblings. As I came to a stop, they all started coming to the car. I cracked the passenger window and asked, "What's up?" She said she thought it would be nice if I took them all out to dinner. After some heated back and forth, I drove away and left them all standing there. Since I was only eating for one, I had a much better meal. There was no second date. Story 4. She appeared in 2 local print advertisements but constantly talked about being a model. You could mention the Holocaust and she would find a way to relate it to her modeling experience. However, when she was rude to the servers, that was unacceptable. Story 5. I met a man at our county fair. He seemed nice, and my sister knew him and said he was a decent person. So we set up a date for the following Friday. He asked for my work number, which I gave him with the stern warning that my desk was outside my boss's office. So I really couldn't take office calls unless they were emergencies. On Monday, he sent me flowers. Then he called me to see if I had received them. I said I had. "Why didn't you call me and thank me?" I said I had just gotten them 2 minutes before and was in the middle of a project, but thanked him for the flowers. "Oh, okay. Well, you can call me and thank me later." That was odd. An hour later, he called again because I didn't call him back. "I'm still at work." "I thought I told you I really can't have personal calls at work." He insisted that I could at least spare a couple of minutes to thank him for the flowers. "I already thanked you the first time you called." I was beginning to get annoyed. "Why don't you call me at home instead of at work?" He called me one more time that day, but I wasn't at my desk. One of my employees gave me the message. By this time, I was so annoyed I threw away the flowers. I didn't call him back at work. By the time I got home, which is almost a 2-hour one-way commute, my voicemail was filled with his messages. They began mildly, "Hello? I was just wondering when you were going to call me," and escalated from there. "Are you screening my calls? Did I do something wrong? Why won't you talk to me? I did buy you flowers. It would be nice if you'd at least give me a proper thanks." The last message was cut off, but he sounded panicked. So I called him, and when he answered, I could tell he was crying. "Did you not listen to anything I told you at the fair? I can't take personal calls at work. I work 2 hours from home. I don't get off until 5 and don't get home until 7. He kept crying. I listened to him for a couple of minutes, waiting for him to catch his breath, before I said, "Yeah, sorry, Kevin. This isn't going to happen. I am far too independent to deal with a needy partner." I hung up my phone. The following day, he had filled my work voicemail with tearful pleas to call him and just give him a chance. I deleted each message, but he kept calling. Finally, I asked information technology if they could give me a different phone number. They did. He tried calling the main line to get my new number, but I had already warned them not to give it out. When I went home, he had again filled my voicemail. The following day, I called the phone company and paid a $50 charge to change my number. Fortunately, I had never given him my home address and had warned my sister about him. She had no idea he was like that, and he did reach out to her best friend to get it. Fortunately, she didn't know. I ran into him in town about a year later and rushed into the customer service area, begging them to let me hide back there. Sure enough, he came to that area and asked if they had seen me. "No customers are allowed back here." "Sorry." He waited outside the room for about 10 minutes before finally leaving. Story 6. She was talking about herself in the third person. "Debbie likes this place. Debbie is going to the ladies' room. Debbie needs another drink. You know, Debbie is still a virgin. No. Later. Debbie." Story 7. I had picked her up and was going to take her bowling. On the way, she started to press me about my religious beliefs, and I told her I was spiritual but not religious. That wasn't good enough for her, and she asked if I believed in Jesus. I said, "If you mean that he existed, yes, but if you mean as a god, then no." She told me I was going to hell, and I laughed. But she didn't. I asked if she was serious, and she said yes. So I turned the car around and took her back to her car. She didn't realize it at first, but once we were almost there, she said, "Wait, are you taking me back to my car? So we're not going bowling?" I said, "You told me I was going to hell. In my book, that's extremely rude, and obviously this isn't going to work. So yes, the date is over." She tried to argue with me while still in the car, so I got out and said, "Let's talk outside." She got out and I only got halfway out, waited for her to shut the door, locked it, got back inside, and drove off. Story 8. Showed up for an online date and the man was easily 10 years older than his photos. I told him it is a form of lying and that he will never find someone by doing that. Another bad date was his first statement after I sat down. "So why should I date you?" I walked out. Story 9. I was on a date with a girl who was glued to her cell phone. She waited until we got to the restaurant, which she asked me to take her to inform me that she had no money and expected me to pay. When the waiter came up and asked what we would like, she proceeded to order steak and lobster tail, a bottle of champagne, and a slice of cheesecake to go. She never looked away from her phone even once, talking about her fans and how she was a successful influencer on Instagram. Meanwhile, I needed to pay while she ordered the most expensive items on the menu. I told her I needed to go to the bathroom, but she didn't even acknowledge me. Her steak, lobster tail, and bottle of champagne had arrived as I got up. I don't like to lie, but this was an exception. I knew this girl was going to be a huge hassle and didn't see me as anything other than a free meal ticket. So I stepped into the bathroom, took a quick break, walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove off. She didn't notice for a whole 45 minutes. I had already gotten back to my apartment, which was only about 20 minutes away from the restaurant. Then I received a spree of panicked text messages with no punctuation or correct spelling. She was upset that I had left her there. The manager of the restaurant was threatening to call the police because she ordered over $100 worth of food, including the bottle of champagne, and because she couldn't pay, she was being accused of theft. I sent one text message before blocking her number. "Get your Instagram fans to pay for it. I'm not going to excuse what I did. And yes, I was wrong for doing it. But in my defense, who is really the bigger asshole?" Story 10. Just canceled a date that should have been this past weekend. She bailed on a hangout we were going to do. I was not bothered by it. I admit we may have been moving a bit fast and wanted her to feel comfortable. For the next 3 to 4 days, she said she would call me, but I never heard from her until I reached out the next day. When I asked if she was still interested, she said she was. I know she was busy and had unexpected events pop up, but something about making plans and never following through on them or telling me that she could not do it did not sit right with me. Interested or not, I was already at the point where I did not believe her when she said she would do something, and I do not think that was a good foundation to build on. It is disappointing because she genuinely seemed upset, but we are in our 30s, and I do not think there is an excuse for that kind of consistent lapse in communication. Story 11. I met a girl on a dating app and we met up at a bar for a drink before dinner. When I arrived, she had already had at least 2 drinks and appeared at least 50 pounds heavier than her pictures. The latter was not a huge issue, so I decided to stay and see if she was at least pleasant to talk to. After a few minutes of slurring her words and flirting with a very uncomfortable bartender, she went to the bathroom. I quickly paid my bill, went to my car, and ended our match as I drove away. Story 12. 3 times I have avoided it. Twice they got really drunk, and the third was 10 years older and easily 100 pounds heavier. Story 13. Years ago, I met a girl on Match.com. Everything seemed to check out. Great profile, great pictures, a good career, and her own place. We talked online for about a week and finally agreed to meet for dinner. As I was pulling into the parking lot of the restaurant, she texted me, "I'm here, standing outside." I looked around the restaurant and saw a woman who was literally 300 pounds and did not look like the profile picture. I texted her and asked, "Are you wearing a purple top and black pants?" She said yes. Long story short, I kept driving. Later, I sent her a text saying, "Sorry, but you look nothing like your photos, and this is not going to work out." She responded that she used her friend's photos, but it was okay because she was currently on a diet and once she lost the weight, she would look like the photos. Story 14. She brought her mother. To be precise, her mother came along to interview me and did not say no. Story 15. First and only attempt at internet dating back in the 1990s. Her profile picture was an old scanned photo from when she was still in high school. When I went to pick her up, she weighed about 400 pounds. She was wearing an ankle monitor for the attempted murder of her husband. She had stabbed him 6 times in the chest with a steak knife. I politely took her to the nearest bar, bought her one drink, and then took her home. She invited me inside, but as soon as she got out of my car, I locked the door and drove away. Story 16. She showed up 30 minutes late, did not apologize, spent the entire time on her phone, and repeatedly called her ex crazy every few minutes. I just paid for my drink and left. Story 17. The morning of our first date, I opened Facebook and saw I had 4 messages from women saying he either assaulted them or tried to while they were with him. So I decided to end it immediately. I blocked him and he still found a way to contact me. Without me even explaining why I blocked him, he immediately responded with a sob story about why I should not believe those women. Story 18. I went to meet a man, and as soon as he saw me, he said, "Oh, you looked more like Katy Perry in your picture." And he looked disappointed. I just closed his car door and went back inside. Story 19. I was stood up and looking back. I kinda understand why. We met at a coffee shop and just didn't click. He was clearly looking for a woman who was not me. I walked in and he said, "Your sister said you were tall." I replied, "Yeah, I'm 6 feet 2 inches. So nice to meet you. Let's order a coffee." He said, "You don't look like what I thought you would." After I asked why, he seemed a little checked out about 5 minutes in. He kept checking his phone the moment we sat down. I cut it short and said, "I'm sorry that things aren't what you expected." He said, "No, you're great. I just don't like sports and more built women." I had never once talked about sports and I'm not built at all. I'm not a beanpole. At that moment I was a size 10, so not bigger either. Anyway, I went to the bathroom and when I came back out, he was gone. The baristas gave me a free cup of coffee because they witnessed the whole thing. Story 20. Without the long backstory about how this could have happened, we sat down and soon I discovered she thought I was Jewish. She had every right to believe that, given how we met. In fact, she was right in thinking there was no way I wasn't Jewish. I am not. I was raised Catholic. She immediately became upset. She began to recount the history of persecution of Jews in our city by Catholics. I called for the check. She continued, returning to the late 18th century. We walked out the door together. I tried to go my own way on the street, and she followed me, still yelling and angry. Eventually, she went her own way. The next day, she left a voicemail saying she was sorry about how it ended, but if I ever wanted to get together again to hear more about the history of Catholicism and Judaism in our city, to get in touch. I did not. Story 21. Things were good for about 15 minutes. Then she kept getting another glass of wine after another. After about half an hour, she gave me no conversation or answers, and I had to steer the whole situation. An hour in, I asked for the check, and of course, the place did not separate bills, so I gave her $20. I only had one beer, and she started flipping out that I was leaving. I had told her a little before that I had to get up early in the morning as an excuse to leave, but she started screaming at me, and the whole bar was watching. She would not take my money, but I made her, then left. She had about 6 glasses in an hour and wanted me to drink more too. Story 22. I am a vegetarian. Me, that's nice. I know a great vegetarian restaurant we can go to, but I love meat. Don't worry, we will fix that. Story 23. Anytime I read these stories of bad dates, It opens third eye perception to the number of delusional people out there. Some of these are hilarious, and some are just baffling. Story 24. Yes, a Bumble date a few years ago. I matched with this woman who was Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and I am very much Caucasian. None of my pictures showed me as tanned or dark in any way. I made no comments or pretenses about not being white. I went to the date, walked into the cafe, and saw her sitting at a table. I walked up and said hi. She looked a little irked, but we talked for a few minutes. My order hadn't even arrived when she asked, "So, you're white?" I said, "Excuse me." She continued, "So you're like a white guy?" I was taken aback and said, "Yes. I mean, did you think I wasn't? I don't think I looked different than in my pictures." Then she said, "Oh, I didn't really look at them. But yeah, sorry, I don't talk to white boys." So I just dropped $5 on the table and walked out. Later, I found out she knew some mutual friends. They all asked what happened with the date, and I told them. They laughed and thought I was kidding, then looked into it and found out she was like that with a lot of men. Crazy. Story 25. I have had dates where I knew I was doomed, but I have always gone through with it and made the best of it. Story 26. I should have left the first date because he was obnoxious and clingy. The first thing he did when he saw me in the parking lot was run up to me and give me a huge bear hug. It freaked me out so much I nearly bolted for my car. Story 27. She was so glued to her phone that I could have jumped on the table and screamed, and she probably would not have noticed. After trying to make conversation for a while, I gave up, paid the waiter, who was a friend of mine, and left through a side exit. According to him, she stayed for 20 minutes, then asked about my whereabouts and left embarrassed. This was a blind date set up by a friend. She apologized and told me that the girl was not always like that. It turns out my date was very shy, and our mutual friend had mostly hung out with her for partying, where the alcohol turned her into a social butterfly. Story 28. I backed out of a one-night stand. I met a woman at a bar by singing Metallica's version of Turn the Page. She was dressed in all black leather, very rebellious. During the walk back to my place, she talked about how no one should question the government, that the government always knows what is best, and how she couldn't wait to join the army so she could spend her life as a mindless robot doing whatever she was told, never questioning orders, even if they involved committing war crimes. I'm sure I'm not accurately portraying just how strange the whole thing was, but when we got to my place, I asked if this was some kind of joke. She doubled down, so I asked her to leave. The next day, I was leaving for vacation and saw that she was working security doing bag checks at the airport. I was pretty nervous going through her line, but she acted like I was just another random person and never showed any recognition. That was a relief. Story 29. She said, "Just so you know, I have a boyfriend, so he takes priority." I left the museum date, and she sent a text later saying, "We can still hang out, just that if he wants to see me, I'm going to him." Bay Area dating is a funny thing. Story 30. I proposed several ideas for first dates, and she said all of them were bad ideas. I finally asked her what she wanted to do for a first date, and she said, "I might be too much of a romantic, but I expect the guy to be the one who plans out the date." So I told her it was pretty clear that we were not compatible. Story 31. Got catfished. His pictures. 6 feet tall, somewhat fit, good-looking man, late 20s, who showed up, mid-40s, about 5 feet 7 inches, beer belly, rat tail ponytail, bald on top, glasses, jean shorts. He still tried to say the pictures were just old. Everything was a lie, and I was so flabbergasted that I jokingly insisted on seeing his identification. First, he lied and said he left it in the car. When I wouldn't drop it, he pulled out his wallet. I snatched his wallet, and he had several identifications from different states and different identities. Thank goodness I met him in a public place. Story 32. A man told me I should always obey and never fight back against his parents, even if they are wrong. He also asked how I feel about his parents moving in if we get married. I will have opinions even if it is about my own parents. Do I look like a doormat to you? Story 33. I never did, but I wanted to several times. It was like watching a building implode in real time. I might have saved some time, but never just left in the middle of a date. I think the closest I got was when the girl leaned in for a kiss after a horrible time, and I firmly said no and walked away. Story 34. I was on an online dating site and talking with a few different people. I talked to one guy who seemed a bit off, nothing I could pinpoint, but I figured he might have been nervous or lacked social skills. I talked to him again and decided we should meet in person to see if the phone was the issue. I could hear at least two other guys near him talking and laughing in the background. It wasn't wrong, but it felt kind of weird. We made tentative plans to meet, and while I was on the phone, he told his two friends where we were going. It didn't pass the vibe check for me and gave me an uneasy feeling. I ghosted him and never heard from him again. It might have been legitimate, but something felt off that he involved two other people in a meeting that was supposed to be just the two of us. The fact that I never heard from him again made me think he was up to something bad. Story 35. Not my story, but one that still makes me laugh. A friend of mine was online dating. When she wanted to meet someone, she usually set up a date at a coffee place around the corner from her apartment. Cheap, low stakes, easy escape. She met a man online who talked about how important helping others was to him. He enjoyed being generous with friends and family and described himself as a giver. They had some things in common, so they decided to meet, and she set a date at the coffee shop. They got there, saw each other, and sat down. He asked, "What would you like?" She asked him to get her a hot chocolate. He went to the counter and ordered her a hot chocolate and a coffee for himself. The items were ready a couple of minutes later, and he brought them to the table. The first words out of his mouth were, "You owe me $3 for the hot chocolate. So much for being a giver and generous." Without a word, she opened her wallet, threw $3 on the table, took her hot chocolate, and walked out the door. Story 36. He was very witty and seemed intelligent over text, although he was a slow responder. On our first date, I realized he took so long to respond because he was neither smart nor witty. Story 37. She was chewing very loudly, and I really cannot stand that. After eating, I told her I was not feeling well and went home. I also told her I am not ready to start seeing someone right now and wished her good luck. Story 38. She talked about moving back to her hometown to work in her parents' antique store. However, she was not fully committed because her brother also worked there, and he had a laborer's mentality. She had a master's degree in psychology but had no clear idea of what she wanted to become in life. Still, she looked down on her brother, who had not studied and, in her eyes, had no ambitions. I lost interest in her after that statement, and the date lasted only 30 minutes. Story 39. I have personally never left a first date abruptly, but there was a ramen shop I used to visit with my older brother and his friends one summer because they had a $5 pitcher special. For some reason, it was also a common spot for many first dates. I saw at least 10 times when women would go to the washroom, and the waiter or waitress would have to tell the man that the woman had paid for their part of the bill and left. Crazy times. Story 40. She was a completely different person from the pictures. I was 15 at the time, and I guess she was around the same age. We were talking through social media, planned a day to meet in person, and all I saw was a girl who looked very different from the pictures, yelling, "Hey, it's me." I thought, this can't be real. I sat down for a maximum of 10 minutes and then I left. Apparently, she had been posting pictures of one of her friends on her social media. Story 41. She got up to go to the toilet and came back with feces on her hand. I gently suggested she go back and finish the job. However, she openly acknowledged her dirty hand, said she would wash it tomorrow, and then continued eating. I did not return her calls or texts. Story 42. I told him I did not drink, and he suggested we meet at a brewery. I thought I could just get a soda, but they had no soft drinks other than water. He spent the first 20 minutes trying to convince me to try his beer. He was dressed very sloppily for a first date, wearing ratty sweatpants and a dingy t-shirt. After he started making fun of my job, I got up and left. Story 43. When I was 17, I was still a virgin, and I was friends with this 22-year-old guy who was very promiscuous. He met two college girls on a dating site at the time about 20 years ago. They were from Connecticut, and he invited them to come to New York City. We were going to double date, and he had booked a hotel. I still remember him telling us that the girls were excited to have fun and said they were adventurous. This made me very anxious at the time. We met them, hugged, and chatted for a bit. My friend said, "Let's go to the hotel," and they agreed. We got on the crowded train and were separated since it was very packed and people were moving around. At some point, I put my hoodie on, ducked down, and got off the train before anyone really noticed. I got a call from my friend about half an hour later, laughing. He said, "That's messed up, but they're not upset, so don't worry about it." And that was it. That friend was later deported to Canada, which was strange. I never talked to or saw him again. Story 44. Picked a girl up and took her to a restaurant. After 30 minutes, she had not put her phone down at all and completely ignored me. I ordered drinks. There was no conversation whatsoever. We ordered food, still nothing. I was not going to waste another second of my life on her. I said I was going to the restroom. She never responded or took her eyes off her phone. I walked straight to my car, blocked her, and left her there. She rode with me. Story 45. Had an internet date with a girl I had been talking to for about 2 weeks. Everything went well. Dinner was good, bowling was fun, and we were clicking. She invited me back to her place and said she was going to change quickly. She came back out 10 minutes later in lingerie. Everything was going well so far. Then, after a short make-out session, she got up, reached into her nightstand, pulled out a meth pipe and used it. She asked if I wanted some. I said no, I was good, and told her I would go to my truck and get a condom. I went to the truck and left immediately. Story 46. I didn't nope out, but I didn't do a second date. The man was huge, both in weight and height. I didn't know what to expect since it was a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. He wanted to sit holding hands across the table and stare longingly into each other's eyes. Then, on the way to our cars, which we drove separately, he picked me up. I am not a toddler. Story 47. Man, this is going to sound made up. I was dating casually with intention on the back burner. I hit it off with a girl, and she invited me to a screening of Nosferatu, the original with Radiohead's OK Computer playing over it. Sounds ridiculous, but it was up my alley. I met her at a bar, where she had been waiting for who knows how long. She had had a few glasses of wine. No big deal. We walked to the venue. On the way, she told me she'd be dancing and not to be embarrassed by it. I didn't know what the venue was, so I thought it was no big deal. We got to the venue, and it was literally like a theater with pews. Not normal theater seating, but church pews. The drinks were hitting her. She was dancing in a silent film theater to the Radiohead score, and then started getting loud. Once the attention was drawn to me because of her, I left. I didn't even ghost her. I said I was going to leave. What a weird night. Haven't spoken since. Story 48. My first dates usually involved going for a walk and maybe having coffee or ice cream if there was a connection. With one man, I knew instantly when I saw him waiting for me that we had no chemistry. I thought I could at least try, but we walked for about 10 minutes, and I got so bored. We could not find a topic to talk about. I decided to end the date early. Story 49. MySpace angle. I was still a teenager and didn't know to watch out for it. She was about 300 pounds heavier than her pictures had led me to expect. Another date around the same time, 9th or 10th grade, we went to the movie theater, bought popcorn, sat in silence for the entire movie, and then went our separate ways. We had been pretty good friends in real life and often stayed up late chatting on Microsoft Network. But somehow, one-on-one, we had nothing to say to each other and never spoke again. It was the strangest date of my life. Story 50. When I was a teenager, I met a boy who liked me for a date. Because we were 17, he took me to Jack in the Box. I do not hold that against him. It is fine. However, he proceeded to eat mozzarella sticks with marinara sauce, and then, before even digesting his food or rinsing out his mouth with the hydrogen carbonate he bought himself, he reached across the table, grabbed my face, and shoved his tongue down my throat. I have never shoved a person more violently than I did at that moment. I walked out without saying a word, crossed the street to a payphone, and called my mother to come get me immediately. I never ate mozzarella sticks again. Story 51. We drove around looking for a place to eat, all the while teasing each other. She said I should just take her to McDonald's if I was going to be cheap, so I did and ordered her a coffee to help with her attitude. We were insulting each other so much, it probably meant something relevant to the conversation. I ended up dropping her off at the bus stop, her choice, so she could get home. She threw the coffee at my car. I laughed and never saw her again. Story 52. Twice. The first time was a coffee date with a man I met online. 5 minutes into the date, he was playing footsie with my leg. I told him to behave, but he became more obnoxious. I walked out after the server brought our coffee. There was no second date, even though he apologized profusely after I left. The second time was with another man I met on the internet. We went to a lunch date. Halfway through, after our appetizer, he started to talk about politics. I am very open to political discussions, but by the time the entrees arrived, I found out that he was a big-time anti-Semite, a Nazi admirer, and strongly supported the manosphere. I excused myself to go to the restroom and then quietly left. I paid for the entire lunch quietly in front of the restaurant while he was still distracted. I blocked his number and never looked back. Story 53. A woman wanted me to meet her at 1 a.m. at a bar downtown. The whole situation was odd. She refused to meet at a normal time. No, she did not work long hours. She has a regular 9-to-5 job. Story 54. The person used a fake photo, but it was not too far from their real appearance, so I let it slide. They spent the entire time talking about themselves and never asked a single question. It was the only time in my life that I ended a meeting early and left immediately. Story 55. Things were cool until his jokes became offensive and felt very objectifying. He tried to say it was just how he is, but that is not my kind of humor. Story 56. My sister set me up on a blind date with a friend of theirs. I didn't have anything better to do, and they told me she was gorgeous, so I was game. She turned up to the pub with my sisters and half a dozen of her friends. She was not gorgeous and was, in fact, very unattractive. I finished my pint, excused myself to the toilets, and left immediately. I jumped on a bus just as I saw her car leave the car park quickly to find me. 6 months later, I walked out of my bedroom at my parents' house after a night out in just my boxers, bleary-eyed, and heard, "So that's what I missed out on." She had been kicked out of her parents' house, and my parents offered to let her stay while she got herself settled. 3 months after that, she was still there, giving the evil eye to any girl I brought home. It was a goddamn nightmare. Story 57. Yes, of course, the same as people did to me, but there was one time when I was waiting on the curbside for my date to arrive. When he saw me, he bent down a little and did the double gunshot hand gesture. It was a complete turn-off, and the date ended there. I was so uninterested after that. Story 58. Many times, I'll get up and leave if I don't like something. We are too old for nonsense, and I am not someone to be played around with. There are too many people who do not have any common sense at all. Story 59. Back in my day, we did not have this newfangled Tinder or Bumble for hookups. If you wanted to have essentially no strings, semi-anonymous sex with someone from the internet, you had to venture into the wildlands. That was the casual encounter section on Craigslist. One weekend, I found myself in a situation where the full understanding was that she and I were going to go to lunch and then go back to her place and have sex. When I got there, it turned out she had a roommate I was not aware of, and she was taking a shower despite me arriving at the expected time. The roommate invited me in and sat me down on the couch. She then proceeded to make extraordinarily awkward small talk that made it very clear she knew exactly why I was there. Then my date came out of the shower, only mostly clothed, to sit down next to me on the couch. At least she looked like the pictures we had exchanged, and she was relatively attractive, relative to the league you are playing in on Craigslist. She then did 2 things that inspired me to respond to this post. First, she stroked my arm and said, "God, your arm hair is so sexy." Okay, not the weirdest thing. I cannot say any other woman has ever commented on my arm hair since. Second, while sitting on the couch next to her roommate who was just staring at me like I was the latest piece of meat to walk into this apartment, she grabbed a sizable handful of my chest and said, and this phrase will forever be burned into my mind. I love it when my cuddle babies have breasts too. She then let me know that we should go back to her bedroom before lunch. Being the horny 20-something I was, of course I did. One round of fairly disappointing sex later, involving oral sex I performed at her insistence with the aid of strawberry-flavored lubricant. And let's be clear, flavored lubricant did not improve the flavor despite her being fresh out of the shower. I excused myself to get something out of my car and ditched her for lunch. On the way back home, she called my phone more than 20 times, sent me nearly 50 text messages and around 10 emails, and found herself blocked. Story 60. We were going to meet, but his breath smelled so bad that it completely killed my vibes and made me instantly unattracted to him. Story 61. Met online and was supposed to be a lunch date, but the person kept talking about how he never gets dates and how difficult online dating is, continuously putting himself down. I felt bad but couldn't get a word in to say something nice. He also lied about his appearance, which I didn't even mention. I finished my soda while he talked, paid for it, and left early. Story 62. Met for a first date and turned around at the door and left when I saw she looked nothing like her pictures. Story 63. Some of what she was saying was freaking me out. I felt like if I messed up I would be killed. No joke. I said, "Hey, this has been an interesting date, but I think this is where I go home alone." I walked out of the bar with an open tab and an asshole tight enough to create diamonds. Story 64. I was planning a movie and dinner for the first date. I showed up looking presentable, and she showed up smelling funny and looking like she just rolled out of bed. It was 5 o'clock in the evening. She was also much taller than she claimed online. Her profile said 5 feet 2 inches, but she was actually about 5 feet 10 inches. I did not care about the height difference, but I wondered why she lied. She barely said 2 words to me before the movie started. While we were in the theater, she tried to hold my hand and reach for my private area. I excused myself to the restroom and did not come back. The movie was trash anyway. Story 65. I was already kind of not feeling it, and I lied and made up some excuse about being overwhelmed or whatever. I think it's safer to reject people over text. He nodded understandingly and then asked, "Do you want to see my collarbones? It'll help." I didn't say anything because what the heck? He took my non-answer as a yes and pulled the collar of his shirt to the side, showing his collarbones. I was looking at him dumbfounded, and I guess he took that as a job well done and said, "Feel better now?" He was completely serious too. I almost couldn't leave quickly enough. Story 66. My friend canceled before the recent date. He was a family friend who got her number through his mom. She had a crush on him years ago. It turned out he actually wanted to go to the bar where her sister works. She asked her half-sister how she knew this guy because he was friends with the other side of the family, not her sister's side. Her sister revealed that the guy brings dates there every week, which she finds very strange, and that he does cocaine in their bathroom. The date was completely canceled due to multiple red flags. Story 67. She threw a drink in my face because she misheard something I said and then yelled at me for being a pig. What she heard was so different from what I actually said that it still confuses me. I said something like, "I went to work today," and she heard something like, "I hate the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community." I still have no idea how she misheard so badly. Story 68. Not my story, but a friend from a while back matched with a girl on Tinder, sent hot, heavy, and steamy messages in lingerie saying how sexy he was and how she wanted to be intimate on the first date. They went out to eat at an expensive place, ordered the most expensive items, and as soon as they finished, she took an Uber and left him. She never called him back and blocked him. Another friend got upset and happened to match with her. She repeated the exact same routine she used on my other friend. He took her out, and they both ordered the most expensive items on the menu. He let her have all the expensive drinks and cocktails she wanted. He excused himself to the bathroom and left before the check arrived. She spent days texting him, asking for money to pay for the meal. He told her about being friends with the same guy and how karma works. She told him to leave her alone, and he blocked her. Story 69. Some 15 years ago, when I was in my mid-20s, a straight male friend set me up on a date. He said, I only know one other gay guy. You two should be together. Maybe that's all straight people think gay people need to have in common. Maybe he was just trying to be a friend. But when you set people up who are completely different in every way except their sexuality, you're not being a bro. That's like me setting up an immigration and customs enforcement agent with a 300-pound Mexican mother of 8 and saying, well, she has a vagina, so I thought you'd be interested. I let him pick me up. Really, I should have just driven myself. I was instantly disappointed in his looks. Short, chubby, bland. Khaki shorts and an old navy shirt that clearly showed his small man boobs. A couple of years younger, freshly 21. Just a generic preppy high school vibe. And a mouth way too big for his face. I found him a bit unsettling, but I didn't want to be shallow and bail just because he wasn't my idea of cute. So we headed to the restaurant he picked. On the way there, I realized a shallow and quick no would have been the right move. Every word out of his mouth made it worse. I learned he's a little gay boy with a Christian pastor dad. He loves Jesus and hopes I do too. I quickly said I don't believe in any of that. He picked Italian food. Sauce, meat, pasta, spices. Not exactly the pre-sex meal you want. Then he started talking. His favorite shows are The Kardashians and Vanderpump Rules. I expressed my disdain for that schlock. He loves Lady Gaga and Katy Perry. I realized he's that kind of gay, effeminate loves drama. I could see him wearing glitter to bed one day. I realized there's a whole world of girly gays where I'm the bad date. But I was uninterested in going further. I just wanted to get through the meal and let him know there was no world where we'd end up together without an argument. To my surprise, the desperate little queen didn't care about any of my responses. When the meal was over, he tried to pay for both of us, and I refused. He tried to get me to get drunk with him at the bar afterward, but I told him I wasn't trying to have that long of a night. I asked the waiter to split the check, paid for my share, and we went back to his car. He wanted to go to a park and walk around in the August heat. I told him, oh no, I'd really just rather go home. On the drive, he started showing me his nude photos on his phone. Pictures of his fat body in a bad way in a jockstrap. Another with his belly hanging over his arm as he covered only his genitals with his hand. These were not attractive pictures. They were flabby, role-filled attempts to pose like a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model in his bathroom mirror. We could not be more different. I've never taken a nude photo of myself. I am tall, calm, dress well, responsible with money, atheist, independent, and honestly aloof. The idea of being paired up with a super needy, childlike adult is disturbing to me in a visceral way. This is a man who still wishes he were 16 and acts like it. A guy who thinks being gay is about doing makeup on YouTube and that RuPaul's Drag Race represents our community. I just go grocery shopping, spend time at comedy clubs, Broadway plays, and urban exploring in other cities. I'm not at home watching bad people behave poorly or men dressing up as cartoon characters. I don't get bored and strip down to do duck face pictures in the shower. I do not relate. I told him I didn't want to see any more pictures and that I didn't have anything like that on my phone. I said I just wanted to go home and that I was getting a headache. So I stared out the passenger window in silence. He put on some teeny bopper gay pop nonsense, and my soul was withering. When we got to my house, he asked if I wanted to go somewhere else when I felt better. I just said, oh, no thank you. It was nice meeting you. Have a great night. The nicest thing he did was not try to text me after. I never agreed to a blind date again. That guy was truly the bottom of the barrel, and I hope he realized that showing people your genitals on the drive home from an awkward dinner is no way to get a boyfriend of any substance. Story 70. It was supposed to be a double date. The girl was a friend of the couple who were friends of mine. When I found out that the girls had selected the most expensive restaurant in the neighborhood for dinner, I canceled. Was I wrong? Story 71. First date with a woman I met on Tinder. We were at a restaurant, having some wine and a fun conversation, when a very tall, muscular man walked by our table with a very tall, fit woman at his side, on their way out. Both were at least 10 years younger than me and my date. This woman stopped talking mid-sentence, looking over my shoulder to better measure that man. Like, from head to toe and back. Like, gazing at him with please notice me eyes, like the whole time until they passed our table. This lasted about 5 seconds, and the man did not even notice her. Once they were gone, she turned back to me and resumed our conversation as if it was perfectly normal. I said, "We're not a good match, but thanks for coming," and immediately asked the waiter for the check. And I am not exaggerating, that grown woman started pouting and complaining because she had made plans for us later, and I was ruining everything. Story 72. Besides pretending to be someone else, they were not who they presented themselves as. Physically, they were unpleasant. Story 73. So, the first date with an Indian girl at a jazz bar was going well until about 3 drinks in. She brings up English colonialism to give me a hard time. I say all my family is Irish, so it wasn't my fault. A little later, she brings up the Irish potato famine, and I just thought, what is going on behind the scenes? I went to the restroom after the 4th or 5th drink and had a quiet moment of self-reflection. I thought, well, this will be a disaster, and I quickly told her on my way out that I was leaving. I wasn't interested enough and had party snacks at home. Otherwise, I might have carried on with it. Story 74. I made it clear on my profile that I was not into artifice and was severely allergic to some perfumes. She showed up dressed to the nines. Hair, nails, makeup, and smelling so bad I could taste it. 10 seconds in, I just said, "I have to go, sorry," and left. Story 75. I have shared this before. It was at the end of a first date that had gone fairly well. We walked back to my place, and he made his move to kiss me. We kissed, his hands running up and down my arms trying to get into the very tight turtleneck sweater. Then he informed me that my skin was much smoother than his sister's. I was immediately shocked, pushed him away, and remembered that I had an early day the next morning. I promptly shoved him out the door. I am very glad this was just before cell phones were common, so it was easy to avoid his calls. I guess that was the first time I had to ghost someone. Story 76. I withdrew from a first date that was supposed to take place at a location halfway between us. There were several warning signs, as they were very eager despite knowing each other for less than a week. They wanted the date to happen as soon as possible from the moment we started talking. Something felt very off about them, but I was willing to go on the date to see if I was just imagining it. About 2 hours before the date, they asked if I could come to their hometown, to a pub very close to their house, and then said we could go back to their place afterward. I tried to politely insist on staying at the originally agreed location, but they kept insisting and practically begged me to come to them. When I canceled the date because I felt creeped out, less than an hour before I was supposed to leave, they brushed it off and asked when we could reschedule. They continued to pressure me to come to their area, so I ended up blocking them. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.